from Shanghai, China. I'm here today to talk about social distancing. So it can help us to stop the spread of COVID-19, but it's difficult to implement. Asking people to stop hanging out with their friends and family ain't so simple. I'm going to do two things today. Firstly is to reflect on China, the experience in China in implementing self-quarantine at a mass scale of millions. What are the key factors that have enabled that? The second thing I'll do today is to draw the key lessons that can be learned from the China experience and put out some thought starters on how they could potentially be applied to other places. I see three factors that have enabled China to achieve social distancing via self-quarantine. Number one, a system of checkpoints was put in place quickly and clearly. This may sound obvious, but it's the starting point. My personal experience of self-quarantine brought me into contact with three touch points. Firstly, a survey. As I returned to my home from overseas, a representative of the neighbourhood committee was there asking me questions about where I'd been and so forth, and proceeded to inform me that I needed to stay at home in self-isolation for 14 days. The second touch point I came across was a QR code. So a system was put in place that leveraged big data and then summarized that in a traffic light system of green, amber, red, which related to my health risk, given the places I'd been to in the past 14 days, 30 days, and so forth. The third touch point I came across was an SMS. So the building management of the office in which I work required me to go through 14 days of self-quarantine, irrespective of where I'd been, before being allowed into the office. And an SMS would be the proof that I needed to demonstrate that. Number two, people were present to enforce the checkpoints. So in the area in which I live, there is a neighbourhood committee, and representatives patrol the streets by day and by night. So in the first minute, literally in the very first minute of me returning home, a representative on the street was there to ask me a string of questions as part of a survey, and then she advised me that I needed to stay at home for 14 days. So this is a core part of the enforcement of self-quarantine, not only as I returned back, but also during my self-quarantine. A second part relates to the office in which I work. So all of the entrances of the building are manned by security guards. They require three things. One is to see your QR code indicating your health status. The second thing is to see the SMS from their property management indicating that I had successfully gone through my self-quarantine. And the third is my passport. Any one of these three are missing, no entry. Number three, data was leveraged to empower the enforcement. So data has really become the magic sauce, the secret sauce, the magic sauce as part of the self-quarantine in China. A QR code system has been put in place that leverages a range of big data sources from mobile phone operators to other areas. In short, it accesses information related to one's location and whereabouts, matching that with any known instances of the virus to produce an alert in the form of a traffic light system. Green indicates your limited risk. Amber and red indicate you're at different levels of risk, which relates to different forms of quarantine that you will need to undertake. For example, if you'd been to a hotspot overseas related to the virus in the past 14 days, that leads to an amber or a red. Similarly, if you'd been eating in a restaurant that had someone else who was later diagnosed with the virus, a similar result. I would now like to introduce 3 principles of behavioral economics which can help provide an angle from which to understand how these factors have led to the successful adoption of self-quarantine and self-distancing in China. The first principle, authority bias. People have a tendency to follow experts, to follow leaders. In the context of COVID-19, with an emerging crisis, limited information, my natural tendency was to, first of all, become aware of what system was in place and naturally follow it. The assumption being, what I'm being told is what will equip me best to survive. Principle number 2, herd behaviour. People have a tendency to do what other people are doing. This plays into the idea that if many people are doing it, it can't be wrong. So as it applies to COVID-19, in my situation, I was receiving information from my employer, from colleagues, from friends, from neighbours. Not only was this useful to understand the situation as it was evolving, it also helped me to understand the system that was in place. And not only that, they were following the system, and naturally, my tendency was, if they're following the system, I need to follow the system. The third principle, incentives. Behaviour change is super difficult to make happen. And that's where incentives and disincentives come in. So for example, what was a disincentive for me? The fact that security guards were checking for my QR code or SMS before allowing me to enter my office building gave me a disincentive to leave my self-quarantine and go to the office. I wouldn't be let in. That was one example. And when it comes to incentives, I had the incentive to protect the people around me, my close people, to avoid putting them at risk that I may have the virus without even knowing. So what lessons can be learned and applied to other places? Reflecting on the experience in China, the system has really been able to achieve success through enforcement and empowerment. Enforcement through people, whether they be in my neighbourhood committee, security guards and others, and empowerment through data. Such an infrastructure may not exist in many other places. However, I do believe the principles of behavioural economics that I've talked through can help spark ideas for how different places can implement other ideas that can help achieve social distancing. So let me share some thought starters. 1. A clear system. Authority bias creates a context where people are seeking leadership from their governments. Now is the time for them to step up and to provide a system that is firm but fair. 2 things they need to do. One is be responsive, quick, and the other is to be clear. 2. Information and motivation. What's needed here is to provide people with sufficient information and motivation for them to take action. Herd behaviour tells us that after people take action, that others will then follow suit. What's needed is information that is simple enough in order to take action. And motivation, well, I think protecting one's life is a good starting point. 3. Monetary and social pressure. Here, we may draw on disincentives. One form of disincentive relates to penalties and fines. You are found to be not compliant with social distancing and therefore you will be fined. That could be one approach. Another form of disincentive could relate to social pressure. So a disincentive related to disappointing your family, your friends, your community in order to contribute to the greater good. 4, a sense of community. What incentives can we create to inspire communities to take action? For example, how about a leaderboard? A leaderboard that could show us which communities, which areas are doing the most to stop the spread of COVID-19. Could we leverage what kind of data points? For example, the number of new cases in certain areas. Who is really getting a good control of that? Or other data related to social distancing, whatever that could look like. And how about community-led, community-initiated schemes? I'm sure that the creativity of people in the community can work wonders with the right incentives. Perhaps here we could also draw from neighbourhood watch programs. Programs that have brought care and friendliness to reduce crime, as opposed to the harsh disincentives. This could be really timely now, in this tough situation where everyone has so much stress and anxiety, in order to give people a sense of pride and purpose to really do something meaningful. These are just some ideas from my side. I would love to hear your thoughts. What have you seen that has proven really effective or ineffective in achieving social distancing?